surrounding these conversations. There's a plethora of toxic and oppressive norms and expectations that force our lived experiences into places that aren't always great. So we were like, okay, how can we shift our individual and societal relationship with sex, sexuality, and intimacy into something that is empowering, positive, inclusive, and just?
And one of those ways that we decided to do that was to try and create an environment for places with all identities, all backgrounds, all paths of life to come and feel as if they can talk about those issues in a safe and welcoming and non-judgmental environment.
Yeah, and the program has grown over the years in a lot of ways to incorporate how all of our different identities sort of behave and react during sexual, romantic, and platonic interactions. We won't be able to cover everything, and even in sessions we can't cover everything because everything is so complex, but we're gonna give it our best shot. And this is also a reminder that Identities falls under the programming of the Haven Sexual Assault Response Center and is the extension of the Counseling Center. Actually, Tricia, do you want to raise your hand real quick? That's Tricia, she's our program coordinator.
Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to colorize your space. So just to talk a little bit about why we like to support the program. One, because we were started by student protests. We know that really students, you all are who run the campus, and you all are the agents of change on campus. And so we're happy to continue to support that student action. Yes means yes in its own way is a sexual violence prevention program, because when we have unhealthy sexual experience, that's what leads to violence. So this is kind of I don't think a roundabout way, but a very introductory way to talk about how do we create spaces that embody consent in everyday interactions. How do we create a space to actually talk about sexual interactions without shame and without stigma. So we're happy to support the program, and that's why we also, in case things arise during the program or folks looking for resources, we're already plugged in and tapped in to help be that resource and to show up. So sometimes I'll pop in, there's one section about rape culture. So sometimes I come in there and we talk about that and have some conversations with the resources then in there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come to the interns, facilitators, or myself. But we're all a team working to make sure that we can also not only end violence, but we also create a more healthy society that doesn't stigmatize sexual interactions, but also creates what healthy interactions could look like.
Yeah. Okay, and real quick, because we're gonna have some participation hopefully later in the session, can I get a show of hands who has been in Yes Means Yes before, if anybody? Okay, a couple of people, that's great. Does anyone remember who has been in Yes Means Yes remember the ground rules that we use?
To use the 5 fingers.
We do use the 5 fingers. You look like you wanted. Here.
It's like no pointing fingers. Oh, microphone. Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm doing this to you. The one is no pointing fingers, so like no blaming people or like calling people out unnecessarily. The one is no middle fingers, no like FUs, I guess. Kind of like being respectful to everyone in the space. The one is the ring finger. It's like kind of being loyal to the space and like loyal to being, I don't know, respectful and like following all the rules. And then the pinky finger is looking out for the little guy. So like recognizing the people who are choosing not to talk and like choosing not to be active in the conversation and think about why. And then the thumb is positivity. Yeah. I'll do this next week. And then one more, the fist for solidarity, because we're there in this space to be there for each other, to have conversations, serious conversations, and if we're not there looking out for each other, then we can't have a good conversation about it. So, all right.
So Yes Means Yes 1.0 is the initial course. It's what, if you haven't taken it before, it's what you would sign up for when you first apply. And the main structure of that is it's 7 weeks. It's a 2-hour class from 7 to 9. It's going to take place either in the WINST classroom right here or in Alana. We're just working that out. And we want to cover as many possible topics as we can, although it's impossible to cover everything. But these are some examples that we would like to talk about, and some get more in depth than others depending on how willing people are to share. And some topics are understandably more difficult than others to talk about, and we take that into consideration.
Yeah, so the overall program sort of covers an introduction to positive sexuality, the concept of consent, of privilege and identities, and how those intersect with sex and sexuality, with rape culture, with sexual agency, and a whole lot more. It's a lot of fun. And for those of you who have taken Yes Means Yes before, we now are doing a 2.0 session. It's a shorter session, it's 5 weeks, and we get a little bit deeper into topics that we introduce and start discussing in 1.0. So, like 1.0, 2.0 asks participants to sort of speak from experience, but get a little bit deeper. It can be hard when you're first learning in 1.0 to be able to share those lived experiences, but in 2.0 it's a smaller group, it gets a little bit deeper, and it's a way to push boundaries and into discussions that maybe you haven't had before. It'll be focusing on sexual health, sex toys, kinks, and global and cross-cultural activism surrounding sex and sexuality. Very cool. Also with free breakfast from Flower and Salt. And we could talk to you till we're blue in the face about the program and what it does, but I think without like sort of engaging with it a little bit, it'd kind of be hard to get the gist. So we're going to do an activity. If it works, we hope. And get your phones out because it's a pull everywhere activity. Okay. So, never mind. Ouch. Okay.
Everyone go to that web address.
So it's pollev.com/LEIYASLAIS872 with Leah Salas, who used to, yeah.
Sending love from afar.
Oh, never mind. This is the page you're trying to reach isn't here.
Okay, well that's
Oh, maybe I misspelled it.
Mine works too.
Maybe I saw page. I'll move it.
And you were talking about they can skip the name part if they don't want to.
yeah, y'all can skip the main part. Don't have to do that. You just answer questions. Okay. So
Did people get in? Okay.
general nods of people. Okay, so this is like a practice run. First one, name a place on campus that has confidential support.
Oh, damn, I put it, I'm so used to Kahoot that I just, yeah, sure. I can give confidential support on occasion, given the correct circumstances and intimacy. I better see the name Daniel get bigger.
I got you, bro.
Thanks.
right. Just like give me one of those when you're mostly done. Cool. Okay, good stuff. I think we got all of them. Haven Counseling Center, Chaplain's Office, Daniel. Yeah. Okay, good stuff.
The health center.
The student health. Yep. They were separated, but yeah.
Y'all.
And us, yeah, we're confidential support, sort of. We can or we can't. Just you have to tell us ahead of time whether or not you want us to share, whether you want help or whether you just want to listen to ear, and then we can be either of those things for you.
And we will be staying around after each session in case people need to talk to us.
All right, we ready for the next one? What's the first word that pops into your head when you think of sex? Okay. I like the wet.
Shout out to whoever put consent.
Yeah. Okay, shout out to whoever put condoms. 10 out of 10. Okay, do any of these surprise you? Not really. Pretty standard fare, yeah. Trust intimacy. Do you feel like, and we're gonna ask some questions in between now. Does anyone feel like maybe you don't need intimacy to have a good sexual encounter? Anyone want to speak to that? Jake?
What?
You were not. You don't have to. I'm picking on you.
Oh my god.
You don't have to.
Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was enthusiastic consent. I think intimacy can be an awesome part of sex if that's something that you're into. Like if you're in a monogamous relationship, there's something kind of great about knowing someone on a very, very personal level. But also, like, sex can just be fun, and it could just be something you want to do, and you don't have to be intimate with the person. You could just know the person or not know the person. You could do whatever you want, like, just have a good time. There's a reason pleasure and fun are the biggest words on there.
Okay. Does anyone else want to share? I won't call anybody. I won't cold call anybody like that again.
Can I offer a question to the space?
Yeah.
I would just like to offer the question of like, what exactly is intimacy, or what exactly is fun, or is an orgasm required for sex to be no?
Okay. A lot of people shouted out at this. Does anyone want to answer? All right. We'll move on. I'll let y'all get away with this one.
Those are things you can talk about at Yes Makes Yes.
Okay. Where and how did you learn about consent? So places like Sex Ed, parents, Tumblr, fan fiction.
Fan fiction, probably calling me out.
Okay, you mostly everyone's in. First of all, whoever put their mom has the best mom. First of all, okay. Do any of these surprise you?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to see things like Twitter and Tumblr up there. The fact that, you know, people of their own agency have to look for resources on consent. That's not something that's taught. Like, I mean, sex ed is still the biggest thing up there, but internet is pretty huge, and like first year orientation is also pretty big, and Colgate and Yes Means Yes. So the fact that we're like 18, 19 years old and first learning about consent.
Yeah, back in my day of 2010, when I first started college, thanks. Yeah, I definitely did not learn from sex ed. It was very like mechanical of like this is how things happen. And my mother got me a really cool book actually about menstruation, and the very last chapter was about like consent and touching, and she glued the pages together so I couldn't read them. Sorry, Mom, I'm calling you out. So yeah, mine was all like internet and college things. Yeah. So
Yeah, kind of a bummer. And like Jake said, we're like adults going into this place where we're on our own for the first time and still not coming in with maybe all of the knowledge we need to have about sex, consent, all of this good stuff. And then everyone's coming in with a different knowledge base, right? Because everyone got a different sex ed experience. A lot of states in the South, I'm from Texas, teach abstinence only, or very like harmful, shaming talks about sex and consent, and yeah, doesn't make for the best environment. Yeah, maybe.
I'm like a terrible person. I'm sorry. I just want to get.
Stuff here.
Maybe I should. I'm just like bouncing around. How many folks here had sex ed? How many folks had sex ed in elementary school? How many folks had sex ed in middle school? How many had it in high school? In your elementary school, what did you learn in your sex ed? Someone shout. What do you?
We had a cop yell at us about not touching other people. Like a straight up cop came in to yell at 8-year-olds about touching people. That was my sex ed in elementary school.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna pause you, Jake, because you could take a space. No offense. But yeah, police abolition. So you learn from a cop. That's scary as hell.
You don't want to disappoint your partner in the future by like losing your virginity before they do, because you'll be used up.
And how old?
5th grade.
Wow. So already, like, emphasis on someone else's pleasure, and you can barely like use the bathroom by yourself. Other folks, what did we learn in our elementary or middle school sex ed?
It was like basic physiology type stuff, and like don't share needles, and my mom wouldn't even let me go to it, so I didn't even have a sex ed class.
And which state are you from?
Michigan.
So your mom opted out. So as we see here, again, as it's something you'll get, and yes means yes, but also the political structure of the states that you all live in or have come from shape what you know or the access to knowledge that you have in these spaces. So I'm from Kansas, Dorothy and Toto, whatever. And in the state of Kansas, our sex education is not required to be medically accurate. We are one of 13 states in the United States where it's not required to be medically accurate. How do you think, and for myself, I've learned things that I learned then, and when I grew up and took a human sexuality class in college, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know anything. Who's heard of the phrase of getting a cherry popped? Who's heard that? What does that mean? Who wants to offer a definition?
It's typical your first time if you have like female reproduction stuff going on down there that you will bleed the first time, and that like blood will come out, and that's what the cherry popping is.
Is that true or false?
False.
How do we know that it's false? Who wants to tell me why it's false? Do you want to? If you.
Not everybody has a hymen. Yeah, not everybody has a hymen, so like there's nothing to pop.
Awesome. And then also that the hymen like expands. Like my mom, I had to tell my mom, who's had 4 kids, that her hymen still exists, and she's had 4 babies out of it. So how does that also, we think about our society, how does the society tell us there are certain markers for if you should be having sex or if you shouldn't, and how is that tied to rape culture? So those are some of the little things that we'll experiment with in Yes Means Yes. And so you all have a breadth of knowledge, and you bring that knowledge to the safe space to talk about those things. Okay.
Yeah, sit up here though.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anyone watch John Oliver?
Yes.
Y'all seen the John Oliver bit about sex education? Y'all should. It had a very similar a clip from an abstinence only education thing, and this woman was talking like, imagine you're a piece of gum, and every time you have sex with someone chewing up that piece of gum, and no one's gonna want to have that old gross piece of gum.
Yeah, it's terrible, right? So, things to think about. Okay, do certain identities impact the way you engage in sexual encounters? And this can be anything.
Just like a yes or no.
You can be a yes if you feel comfortable sharing some of those identities. You can share those, but there's no pressure to. And it's anonymous, so yes. Cool. All right, most of y'all in? Okay. So, I see a couple of sexualities up here. I see gender, race, religion. Does that surprise anybody? A lot of times religion is very tied up into what our cultural ideas of sex are, yeah? Does anyone not understand that? Does anyone have questions about it?
Yeah.
Or here,
Yeah.
say
So
that.
also thinking about your own experiences, what has religion taught you to think about when it comes to sexual encounters?
Think back to the cherry popping situation. Yes. Okay.
So I went to a Christian church, and I still do, and not from my church, but I was watching a sermon that was like, sex is between a married man and a married woman, and it was very hetero and very cis, and I was like, ah, that makes me uncomfy.
Word. Anybody
Who else has experiences like that? Who have maybe been taught through a religious lens that what you want to do is wrong? And think about how that may impact when it comes to you having access to resources. Think about if you, I'm not going to ask you all, but think about perhaps the age that you first started having sexual encounters. Ideally, that would be the age that you maybe start acquiring birth control methods or STI prevention methods. But were you able to actually talk to your parents about that? What are the social factors that led you to be uncomfortable, if you were uncomfortable, to ask your parents, hey, I need a condom? Or hey, I need a dental dam. So thinking about how the thing is, again, thinking about how does our society groom us to be ashamed, and how is that shame leading to harm? Or how does that shame lead us to also contribute to it without even wanting to? You can accidentally perpetuate a system just by doing, but not know that you're doing that.
Yeah, and it goes both ways too. Something to think about. A lot of places, a lot of authority figures will tell you that sex is shameful and that it's slutty or makes you a whore or whatever. And then there are a lot of other places telling us that if we don't engage, you're a prude, or you're not correct, or you should want that. So it's kind of a trap. Yeah?
Think about the rhetoric. So thinking about what's on the screen here, we see things about sexual orientation or gender expression. What have we been taught? Whether it's, if going back to the other slide about when we first learned about sex, whether it's from media or parents, what are we taught about sex between folks who have similar gender expression? And it may not be your idea, but what have we been spoon fed? What have we been taught?
I think sometimes some people are taught that it might be a phase and something that can be grown out of.
I know specifically in my church, I asked because I wanted to, because I was questioning, and my pastor looked at me and said, we put you into therapy. And the church that my parents still attend is that same church. So it was really like, you do not talk about it, you don't do it, it's not real.
Or we will actively try to change you.
Yeah.
And just going along those lines, all of these identities, these different structural things that are in place, tend to limit who is allowed to have sex or allowed to talk about it, or what is appropriate to do during a sexual encounter.
Yeah. There's a lot of these things we've talked about have, like, it sort of decides who has sexual agency, who has control of their own bodies, and who is allowed to operate those bodies in certain spaces. Things to think about. Ready for the next one? Okay, I think this is the last one. Describe Colgate's hookup culture in one word. Ooh. Okay.
I'm not seeing a lot of compliments.
Good. Okay. I'm gonna give it a little bit. Okay, everybody mostly done? Okay. So. So a lot of these don't hold well. Let's where should we start? The biggest one, hetero.
Would anyone feel comfortable sharing the definition?
Heteronormative heterosexuality. Does anyone know and want to share those definitions? No one? Someone wrote it.
People did actually.
Okay, well.
I think it's also important to think too about how often these things are popping and how even in this space we still don't feel comfortable unpacking it together. And it's not us think about shaming, but let's think about why that is for our own journeys and our own growth, because it's here, but what is it about the difference between seeing it there and having to say it here that makes us uncomfortable?
Because it's the biggest thing, so a lot of people agree on it. So it shouldn't even be that hard, really. We can define it if you like.
I didn't write it because I got lazy and didn't want to get up, but I've been paying attention. So, I mean, I get definition of hetero, obviously, like cisgender, male, female, whatever. But I think like on this campus, in the context of like hookup culture, like most men are not like when they're looking for somebody to hook up with, they're not like looking to like please a woman. Like they just want to get their nut off and go about their night. So I just feel like that's the majority of what is going on. Like, yeah. Is it really hot though? Like, I just feel like it's factual. Like okay, like there was like this viral video on Twitter and it was basically saying that like women do not like, it was like something like 85% of women don't like orgasm from penetration. So like when you're having men who are drunk wanting to hook up, they're not going to be looking to do that. Like it's just really. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
And I think it also, like this heteronormative way of like how you have sex, and we talked earlier about like pleasure and orgasms and intimacy and things like that, and also just like the perceived standards of like what would be sex and like what would be pleasurable and how you can interact with other people is also informed by like cis heteronormativity. So yeah, that's all I got. That's a wrap.
Yeah.
So hetero is really connected to this male serving situation. We think?
And I notice a lot of the times, a lot of the words are associated with alcohol or being intoxicated and not entirely sober.
What does that mean for consent? Any thoughts there, Ashley? I know this is can be a very uncomfortable conversation and difficult, and sometimes conversations that people have not had until this very moment. But I just want to take a moment to pause, and I want you to think of how you're feeling and how this conversation is making you feel, and to just take a moment to if you're feeling anxious or anything like that, to just breathe. And you will place these answers up here, and like Tricia mentioned, this tension of not wanting to talk about them out loud. Just take a moment to pause with yourself, because I know that this is a conversation that we have in smaller groups, and I think one of the aspects of having it in this larger context is one, connecting with each other in a larger sense, and also bringing conversation out of tiny 2-person, 3-person conversations that are whispered into a more public space. I think it's really important. So I think your question was, what alcohol is obviously very pervasive in this word cloud. So and what is that connection to consent? And I know we can have this conversation.
If you're not sober, you can't give proper consent.
Thank you.
And if you feel as though you might have been more comfortable sharing in a smaller group, during the sessions we do break off into small groups to have mini discussions.
Yeah, so it'll be about 20-25 people in a session, we think, right now, but there are large group and small group session when we break up into, like John said, groups of 3 or 4. So there's no, you don't need to feel pressured to share in a big group space. I know this is hard. And something we forgot to mention at the beginning, if you feel uncomfortable, need to take a minute, need to get more food, step out, whatever you need to do that. Okay, so here are things that make me worried. All of them, but mostly fear, pressure, shitty. That's not good. Why might the hookup culture we have right now breed fear? And take a minute to sit with this one. Oh yeah, you know what? Do a pair share. Break up into little groups, people sitting next to you. Just share what you think.
All right. Good conversation. I'm glad that it got loud for a minute. That was nice to hear. Does anyone want to share things that they talked about?
No pressure.
I know we all talked. Fine, okay. We won't make you do it. But before we wrap up, there are just a couple of more things we'd like to unpack here. We've covered heteronormative cishet in the corner. Does everyone know, real quick, just what cisgender means? Does anyone not? We're going to work off the assumption that some of you do not. And so, cisgender is a term for people whose gender expression and presentation matches or like lines up with the biological systems that they have, but that they were assigned at birth. So cisgender as opposed to maybe non-binary or transgender. Does that make sense? Okay.
And then another thing we would like to discuss is the dimension of white. Just a question to think about right now is are certain racial groups on campus more inclined to have sexual agency or to have power overall?
I'm seeing big nods. Anyone want to share thoughts? Hot takes? Not hot takes? No. It's okay. Last thing to think about, there is one good adjective up here, or noun, I guess, intimacy. So it's intimacy, even though this is all going on, it's a toxic space, there's still a place for intimacy. There's still a place for good interactions to happen. Fair or unfair statement, just nod or shake your head. Okay, so there's a way to do it. There's a way to interact with spaces and with people in a way that leads to a positive interaction, that leaves people feeling good, which is the point, yeah? So things to think about. Bring these thoughts to Yasmin's when you all apply. And I think that'll do us for now. Applications are open. Campus distributions will be sending out an email soon. There will be posters up. Applications will close in about 2 weeks, Friday, September 27th, I want to say, at midnight. So you have plenty of time to apply. And you can also reach out to us on social media up there. Yeah. Round of applause for our Yasmin. I hope some of you all will take that opportunity and apply for Yasmin's Yes. And for folks who have done it before, 2.0, are the apps also for 2.0?
Yeah, the apps will be sent out in the same time.
Okay. Great, both apps will be sent out at the same time. Thank you all so much for coming. As a reminder, Caleb Luna will be here next week. I'm so excited. Please make sure that you throw everything away and help stack chairs if you can, and take a moment to check in with yourself. And I hope you all have a great day. That's all. That's it. Hello? Hi, I forgot something. There aren't that many, but I have leftovers of the We Are on Oneida Land posters. Please just take one. But yes, I do have some leftovers that are chilling up here.
Yeah, there's a good chunk of everybody, and it's actually, it's great to have someone sharing, it's like, oh, okay, it's you could stack like two at a time, but don't stack too many because then they're too hard to get on the hanging. Okay, so one point there's gonna be 3 weeks starting pretty much and they're in when you send invitations Monday. My resume's so nice. I like that. Okay.